Looking back, I don't even know the exact moment things started feeling off. But if I had to pick a point, it'd be those late nights, the ones where I'd roll over half awake, expecting to see Kira sleeping beside me like she used to. Except now, more often than not, she was facing the other way, her face lit up by that damn phone screen. I know it sounds stupid, but there was a time I'd give anything to see her smile, to see her happy. Lately, though, it was like I was looking at a stranger who happened to look like my wife. Her grin wasn't the soft one she'd had for years with me. It was sharp, private, like she was letting someone else in on some joke I'd never get to hear. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who starts making something out of nothing. But night after night, there she was lost in her little world, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. I'd turn over, pretending to be asleep, but that feeling of her slipping away got stronger every time. Kira used to tell me everything. I mean, we'd had our problems like any other couple, but there wasn't a time when she didn't talk about her day, even the boring stuff. But suddenly, every conversation started feeling filtered. She'd throw around these half-baked excuses, "Oh, just the girls again," or "Sorry, babe, it's work." I'd nod along, trying not to overthink it. But when you've been with someone that long, you know when they're lying. Or maybe not outright lying, but hiding something. Every girls' night out added another stone to this pile in my gut that told me something was going wrong. Then there was this night I remember like it happened 5 minutes ago. I'd woken up around 2 a.m., and there she was, laughing at something on her phone. I didn't even have to look twice. She was beaming, smiling in this way she hadn't around me in forever. I just lay there, frozen, pretending to be asleep, but feeling more awake than I'd felt in weeks. Who was making her smile like that? I wanted to reach over, grab her phone, and get the truth out of her right then and there. But what if I was just being paranoid? I didn't have anything real to go on, just my own insecurities, right? Things changed between us in ways I'd never thought possible. She was always too tired or not in the mood. I get it, life wears you down, but this wasn't just some rough patch. She'd pull away from me like even being close was too much. Every time I tried to bring it up, she brushed it off like I was the one imagining things. But I wasn't. The woman I loved was right next to me, but every night, it was like she was further away than ever. It was all these little things that started adding up. One day, Kira's talking about some inside joke she had with work friends. I'm sitting there, nodding, trying to act like everything's normal. But when I asked for details, she clammed up. I could see it. She didn't want me in on the joke. And then one day, she's laughing at some private message that pops up. I asked her what was so funny, but she just smiled, shrugged, and changed the topic. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just feeling like an outsider. She was making me one. One of the weirdest parts was how even my friends started noticing things. Sam, one of my oldest buddies from work, casually mentioned seeing her around town with a guy he thought looked familiar. Sam's one of those guys who wouldn't pry even if he walked in on someone mid-affair, so he laughed it off, saying he must have been mistaken. But that offhand comment hit me hard. Now, every time Kira had an excuse to be away, every girls' night out, or late meeting, my mind went to dark places. Who the hell was she really with? And then, almost like fate was dropping hints I wasn't asking for, things got even stranger. The thing that really set me off was Waylon. He was always a bit too friendly with Kira, a little too quick to jump up and grab her a drink at gatherings, laugh at her jokes like she was the funniest person in the room. But it wasn't until that one weekend that I really started to wonder. We were all out with friends, and I noticed Waylon's eyes on her a bit longer than they should have been. He'd linger around her, listen too intently, laugh too hard. It was subtle, but once I'd noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. At that point, every glance, every shared laugh between them felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After the whole Waylon being too attentive episode, I started wondering if I was the only one seeing this. There had to be someone else who noticed the way he hung around Kira like some damn lapdog. And that's when it hit me. Lena, his wife. She was always right there, and I wondered if she'd seen the same things I had. For a while, I let the thought sit. Bringing it up to her felt risky. I wasn't sure if she'd noticed anything or if I'd come off looking like a paranoid idiot. But that feeling of something lurking under the surface wasn't going away. I decided to reach out. One afternoon, I texted her, something casual. Just a, hey, you've noticed Waylon and Kira seem pretty close, right? I try to keep it light, just in case. But Lena's response? It was almost instant. She replied, funny, I was just thinking the same thing. My heart was pounding. What started as casual texts about their behavior slowly turned into something more serious. With every message, it was like peeling back a layer on this mess we were both finding ourselves in. I could tell she was as frustrated and in the dark as I was. And hell, it was a weird comfort, knowing I wasn't losing my mind alone. Lena and I started texting regularly after that. It was strange, this unspoken understanding between us. We both felt isolated, stuck in these marriages where something was obviously wrong, but neither of us knew exactly what we were dealing with. Our conversations turned into our own secret. She'd tell me about Waylon's late nights and business dinners, and I'd fill her in on Kira's excuses about girls' nights that always seemed to fall on the same nights. Each little story felt like another piece of a puzzle we weren't sure we wanted to solve, but at this point, we didn't have a choice. Then came the night it all unraveled. Lena texted me around 8 p.m., saying Waylon had just left for one of those so-called work meetings. The timing lined up perfectly. Kira had just told me she'd be working late at the office. I felt a pit in my stomach, knowing that this might be our chance to finally see what was happening. Lena and I agreed to meet up and follow them. It felt insane, like something out of a bad detective movie, but at this point, I needed to know. We parked near the office where Kira supposedly was and watched from a distance. Not even 10 minutes passed before we saw her walk out, glancing around nervously, and then Waylon pulled up. Watching her get into his car felt like a punch to the gut. We followed them, silent in the car, as they drove across town, eventually stopping in front of a hotel. They went in together, laughing. I couldn't believe it, and from the look on Lena's face, neither could she. When they disappeared into the hotel, Lena and I just sat there. She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I didn't know what to say or do. My anger was boiling over, but I tried to keep it in check, focusing on comforting her. I could barely believe what I was seeing myself, let alone deal with someone else's pain. I wanted to punch something, throw something, anything to release this fire inside me. But sitting in that car, the two of us in shared silence and misery, it felt like some messed up kind of bond. We both knew we needed proof, something undeniable. I snapped a few photos of them leaving the hotel together. As I held my phone, framing the shots, I felt like I was betraying a life I'd spent years building. Here I was, documenting my wife's affair, recording the end of our marriage in real time. Lena looked over at me as I took the photos, her face a mix of pain and determination. It was a sad reality, but we both knew these pictures would be our shield when the time came for a confrontation. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the scenes in my head. Kira's smile when she got into Waylon's car, the way they laughed together, and Lena's tear-streaked face beside me. Everything felt twisted and wrong, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Kira finally came home hours later, tiptoeing through the door. I pretended to be asleep, not ready to face her, not without those pictures to ground me. The next morning, I tried bringing up her late night. I kept it casual, masking my voice as best I could. So, how was work last night? I asked, pouring coffee like nothing was wrong. She barely looked at me, brushing off my question with, oh, just the usual. Her eyes flickered, though, and I knew she was lying. When I pressed a bit, she snapped, asking why I was being so nosy. The irritation in her voice, the way she looked at me like I was some annoying stranger instead of her husband, was infuriating. But I kept calm. After all, I wasn't ready to tip my hand just yet. Instead, I just nodded, pretending to accept her excuse, though every part of me was screaming to confront her. I wanted to throw those pictures in her face, to make her see the pain she'd put me through. But something held me back. Maybe it was the thought of Lena and the plan we were quietly starting to piece together. After that night at the hotel, Lena and I couldn't let it go. We'd been texting almost nonstop, venting, sharing every little betrayal we'd noticed over the years, piecing together just how deep this affair had gone. We both knew confronting them wasn't enough, not after everything we'd seen. We wanted to make them feel the sting, make them live with the anxiety of knowing they'd been caught, unsure of when it would all come crashing down. We decided to meet up in person, somewhere secluded where we could talk openly. I picked a quiet spot at a park on the edge of town, the kind of place no one from our circle would ever go to. When Lena arrived, I could see that same fire in her eyes that had been burning in me for days now. We sat on a bench overlooking a pond, and it felt surreal sitting there with Waylon's wife, plotting a way to expose my own wife's betrayal. We went back and forth on how we do it. Should we throw it in their faces at a family gathering? Or maybe keep dropping hints until they couldn't take it anymore? Every idea sounded like something out of a bad soap opera, and yet here we were, laughing at the irony of it all. We shared stories of Kira's and Waylon's ridiculous excuses, the moments we'd each caught them in their lies, the times we'd tried to believe them even when we knew deep down they weren't telling the truth. Somewhere in all that anger and frustration, there was something else. Sitting there with Lena, feeling her shoulder brush against mine, her laughter echoing in my ears, I felt a pull, a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. I guess when you go through something like this together, you either fall apart or find a strange kind of comfort in each other. It wasn't planned, and it sure as hell wasn't smart, but before I knew it, we were leaning in, our lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts anger and desperation. It was like all the pain and betrayal and everything we'd bottled up finally had an outlet. We didn't talk about it afterward. There wasn't much to say, but from that moment, it felt like we were in this together, truly, and nothing would stop us from seeing it through. Our first real move came at a dinner with our usual group of friends. Kira and I arrived together, the picture of a happy couple, as fake as it felt. I spotted Lena across the table, her expression calm, collected, almost too calm. At one point during the evening, she casually mentioned to the group, "You know, I've always had this knack for telling when someone's hiding something." She let her words hang in the air, looking around the table with a knowing smile. I watched as Waylon shifted uncomfortably, glancing over at Kira, who suddenly looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. They were both squirming, and I couldn't help the satisfaction that crept in, knowing they were on edge. The tension between them didn't go unnoticed. A few of our friends exchanged glances, sensing the weird vibe. No one asked outright, but I could tell some of them were starting to wonder what was going on. That subtle tension was exactly what we wanted, a small taste of the paranoia we knew would only get worse from here. Lena took it a step further by arranging a casual get-together with some of our mutual friends. The plan was simple, just enough hints to keep Kira and Waylon on edge without outright exposing them. Throughout the evening, she'd drop little comments, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know the truth, but enough to keep our two cheaters squirming. "It's funny," she'd say, "how some people think they can keep secrets forever. But the truth always has a way of coming out." Each time, Kira's smile would falter, and Waylon would suddenly need to refill his drink or look away. It wasn't long before our friends started picking up on the strange tension. A couple of them even asked if everything was okay with Kira and me, and I just shrugged, saying we were going through a rough patch. It was a simple answer, but it planted the seeds, making them pay a bit more attention, watch a little closer. That was the beauty of our plan. The longer we kept it up, the more everyone else would see the cracks forming, even if they didn't know why. The real test, though, came during a double date Lena and I set up with Kira and Waylon. It was bold, risky even, but we wanted them to sweat, to feel the walls closing in. We met at a small, cozy restaurant, the kind of place where couples go for quiet dinners, and from the start the tension was thick. Lena and I played our roles perfectly, acting casual but throwing in just enough knowing glances, enough subtle hints to keep them wondering what we knew. At one point, Lena leaned over to Waylon, her voice just loud enough for Kira and me to hear, and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How some things don't stay hidden forever. Almost like fate has a way of making the truth come out." Waylon froze, his face pale as he exchanged a nervous glance with Kira. She looked down at her plate, visibly tense, and I could almost feel her trying to hold herself together. The rest of the night was a game of mental warfare. Every shared glance, every carefully chosen word was meant to unnerve them, to make them feel like the world was closing in. I watched Kira, seeing her nervous glances at Waylon, the way she fidgeted with her napkin, and it was all I could do not to laugh. They were both a mess, and it was exactly what they deserved. By the end of the night, Lena and I had pushed them to the edge without saying a single explicit word about what we knew. They left the restaurant looking like they'd been through hell, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The party was the perfect setting for the next phase of our plan. It was a big gathering, a mix of friends and family, and exactly the kind of place where Whispers could take on a life of their own. Lena and I arrived separately, keeping our distance at first, acting like we were just two people in the same room. Nothing more. But we had a plan, and tonight we were done with subtle hints. Tonight, we were going to put the pressure on. The first strike came from Lena. She found her way into a conversation with Kira and a couple of other friends. I watched from across the room as she started weaving her story, her face a perfect mask of casual curiosity. "Oh, I heard the craziest thing," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw a few more people in. "My friend recently found out her husband was cheating on her. Apparently, she had no idea for years, and then she just stumbled upon the evidence." Kira's reaction was almost too good. I could see her eyes darting around, her hands fidgeting as she forced a tight smile. When Lena went into the details, painting a picture of this friend and how she discovered everything, Kira's face grew paler by the second. She glanced over at Waylon, who was across the room, and I knew she was wondering if this was all just a coincidence or if Lena was onto her. But that was only the beginning. Later in the night, I made sure to plant my own little seed of doubt. Kira had come over to ask me something, and I casually unlocked my phone in front of her, scrolling as if I was looking for something. There, in plain sight, was a photo of her and Waylon leaving the hotel together. I acted like it was just another picture, flipping past it before she could get a good look. But I saw her face freeze, her eyes locked on the screen. I pretended not to notice, casually slipping my phone back into my pocket and carrying on with the conversation like nothing had happened. The rest of the party was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. I could see Kira whispering to Waylon, her face tense as she tried to keep her voice down. Meanwhile, Lena and I exchanged glances across the room, small, knowing smiles that only added to their paranoia. We didn't have to say a word. Just being there, exchanging those looks, was enough to make them sweat. Friends started picking up on the tension too. A couple of them came over, asking if everything was all right with Kira and me, if there was something going on. I shrugged, playing it cool, and just hinted that we'd been having a rough time. It wasn't a lie, technically, but it was just vague enough to keep the rumor mill turning. Every little look, every slight touch between Lena and me added fuel to the fire, and soon enough, the room was buzzing with questions, whispers that Kira and Waylon couldn't ignore. Lena didn't let up, either. At one point, she found herself alone with Waylon in the kitchen. I didn't catch the whole conversation, but I saw enough. She leaned in close, her voice low, and murmured something to him that made his face drain of all color. I heard her say something about how she knew more than she was letting on. Waylon shot her a panicked look, his eyes darting around to make sure no one else was listening. After that, he was glued to Kira's side, pulling her into hushed conversations and glancing nervously around the room, as if expecting someone to jump out and expose them at any moment. It was almost too much fun watching them unravel. Every time Lena and I exchanged a glance, they looked more and more shaken, as if the ground beneath them was starting to crack. By the end of the night, we'd pushed them to their breaking point without even having to confront them directly. As the party started winding down, Lena and I decided to dial up the jealousy factor. We both noticed the way Kira and Waylon couldn't keep their eyes off us, watching every interaction with growing unease. So, I leaned in a bit closer to Lena, making a point to laugh at something she said, resting my hand casually on her shoulder. She played along perfectly, tilting her head toward me, letting her hand linger on my arm. It was just enough to set them off, making them wonder if we were onto them, and if we'd moved on to each other in the process. I caught Kira staring at us, her face a mixture of shock and anger, and when our eyes met, she quickly looked away, trying to mask her reaction. Waylon didn't fare any better. He looked like he was on the verge of confronting us, but every time he took a step in our direction, he'd hesitate, his confidence crumbling. They were both too afraid to make a scene, too unsure of what we knew and what we'd do next. As we left the party, Lena gave me one last look, a smirk that told me we'd done exactly what we'd set out to do. Kira and Waylon were left in a mess of their own making, paranoid, confused, and completely off balance. The family gathering was the moment we'd been working toward, the grand finale we'd meticulously planned, fueled by every ounce of betrayal and frustration we'd bottled up. Kira and I arrived separately, as did Lena and Waylon, each of us pretending to blend into the crowd, but we knew the night would end with all eyes on them. As the evening wore on, my pulse started pounding, knowing what was coming. The room was full, relatives, close friends, people who'd known Kira and me for years. It was surreal, standing among them, knowing I was about to drop a bomb that would change everything. When the moment felt right, I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. "Hey, everyone," I began, loud enough for the entire room to go quiet. I felt dozens of eyes on me, the room shifting its focus. I could see Kira's face from across the room, a look of confusion and a flicker of dread. Waylon was next to her, frozen, his forced smile faltering. "I know this isn't exactly what you all expected tonight," I continued, forcing calm into my voice, "but there's something I need to get off my chest." I could feel the tension rising, could see Kira's hand reaching for Waylon's, and knew they were preparing for the worst. Then I said it. "For the past several months, Kira and Waylon have been having an affair." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. I took out my phone, my hand surprisingly steady, and held up the screen, showing the photos of them leaving the hotel together, unmistakable evidence that silenced any doubt. I flipped through them slowly, making sure everyone saw exactly what Kira and Waylon had been doing behind our backs. The silence was electric, and I could see Kira's face pale as she stumbled backward, speechless. Waylon looked equally shell-shocked, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for something to say, but finding nothing. Then Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "I just want everyone to know how much this has hurt," she began, her eyes glistening with tears. "Waylon was my husband, my partner, and he destroyed everything we built together." She held up her own phone, showing text messages, each one more damning than the last. Every message, every picture added another layer to their shame, painting a picture of betrayal so raw and undeniable that no one could look away. The reactions in the room were immediate. Relatives exchanged horrified glances, friends shook their heads in disgust. A few people, longtime family friends, openly criticized them. "How could you do this to Randall?" "To Lena," someone demanded. Another friend scoffed, saying, "I can't believe I trusted you both." I watched as Kira's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, desperate fear. She managed to pull herself together just enough to approach me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Randall, please," she whispered, clutching at my arm. "We can work through this. You have to believe me, it didn't mean anything." I let her words hang there, hollow and pathetic. I could feel her fingers tightening around my arm, but I stayed still, feeling strangely calm as I looked her straight in the eyes. "It's over, Kira. I'm done." My voice was steady, final. She broke down, her face crumbling, and it was all I could do to keep from feeling a small pang of pity, but it was buried under too much anger, too much betrayal. Across the room, Waylon was trying his own version of damage control. He went around, muttering to friends, trying to explain himself, but it was useless. People turned away, their faces hard and unforgiving. His desperation was almost pitiful, but I couldn't find it in myself to care. He was reaping what he'd sown, and no amount of excuses could salvage what he'd destroyed. By the end of the night, Kira and Waylon stood alone, shunned by nearly everyone in the room. Lena and I left together, stepping out into the cool night air, leaving them to deal with the fallout of their own betrayal. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and we'd finally taken back control. In the weeks following that unforgettable family gathering, everything in my life took on a new clarity. It was like someone had pulled the veil off, exposing the raw truth I'd been avoiding for far too long. Lena and I, scarred and battered, had come out on the other side of the wreckage, and somehow, against all odds, we'd found something real in each other. It was a strange twist of fate, almost poetic really. The two people left behind had discovered each other, not through shared love but through shared pain. One evening, we were sitting on the porch of my place, the warm evening air settling in around us as we watched the sun sink low on the horizon. It had been a quiet day, one of those rare moments of peace that had become foreign to me. As we sat there, talking about everything and nothing, the conversation took a deeper turn. We started talking about our future, not just where we saw ourselves in a year or two, but our dreams, our hopes, the things we'd let slip away while wrapped up in our broken marriages. "We've both got a second chance here," Lena said softly, her gaze fixed on the fading colors of the sunset. "I don't want to waste it. I want something real this time." There was a vulnerability in her voice that hit me hard. I realized then how much I wanted the same thing. We talked for hours, late into the night, about what we valued, what mattered most to us now. Trust sat at the center of it all. Trust and honesty. We'd both seen firsthand what secrets could do, how they could corrode even the strongest bonds. And as the night wore on, we promised each other that, no matter what happened, we'd keep things transparent, even if the truth was hard to hear. Meanwhile, Kira wasn't ready to let go. She showed up at my door a couple of times, as if she believed she could somehow smooth over the wreckage she'd left in her wake. The first time, I opened the door, and there she was looking like she'd barely slept, her face streaked with what looked like fresh tears. "Randall, please," she started, her voice trembling. "Can we talk? I made a mistake. I know I did, but can we fix this?" Looking at her, all I could feel was a strange numbness. The desperation in her voice, her apologies, they didn't stir the emotions they once might have. Instead, it felt empty, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. I listened to her ramble on about regret, about how it didn't mean anything, about how we could find our way back if I'd just give her another chance. But when she finally paused, waiting for me to respond, all I could say was, "Kira, it's over. There's nothing left to fix." Her face crumbled at my words, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. But the betrayal ran too deep, the damage too irreversible. After that, she tried reaching out through messages, her tone swinging from pleading to accusatory. At first, it was more apologies, promises to change, to be better. But when I didn't respond, her tone changed, bitterness seeping through every word. She started blaming me, as if somehow my actions had driven her into Waylon's arms. It was laughable, really, but more than that, it was exhausting. I blocked her number, needing to finally shut the door on that part of my life for good. In the midst of all this, our mutual friends rallied around Lena and me. They were shocked by what had happened, just as blindsided as we'd been. Many reached out, offering their support, their condolences, and more than a few shared that they'd seen little things here and there, small signs they hadn't wanted to believe were real. One friend, Brian, confessed over a coffee that he'd caught Waylon acting a bit too familiar with Kira at a few parties but had brushed it off, thinking it was just harmless friendliness. Now, though, he apologized profusely, reassuring me that he'd have my back and urging me to find some peace and happiness with Lena. Slowly, openly, Lena and I began dating. It felt different from anything I'd experienced before, like we were starting with a clean slate. There was no facade, no secrets, just two people who'd been through hell and were ready for something genuine. The first time I held her hand in public, it felt strange but right, like the first real connection I'd had in a long time. We'd go on long walks, sometimes talking about everything, sometimes walking in comfortable silence. And each time we were together, I felt the weight of the past lifting little by little. One evening, after a long day at work, we found ourselves curled up on my couch, her head resting on my shoulder, her fingers lightly tracing circles on the back of my hand. The silence between us was easy, comfortable, and I found myself savoring the quiet. She looked up at me, her gaze warm but serious. "No more secrets, right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "None," I promised, my voice soft but sure. "I'm in it with every fiber of my being. We both knew too well how corrosive secrets could be, how they could destroy even the most sacred bonds. I knew I wanted no part of that life again, and I could see the same resolve in her eyes. As we walked hand in hand down the street one evening, the cool night air settling around us, it struck me just how far we'd come. We'd both been shattered by the people we thought we'd spend forever with. And yet, here we were, stronger, rebuilding from the ashes. We stopped at the end of the streetlights casting a soft glow, and I turned to her, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of hope, of excitement for what lay ahead. "Here's to new beginnings," I said, my voice filled with a conviction I hadn't known I could still feel. She smiled, squeezing my hand. "To trust, honesty, and finally letting go of the past." And with that, we walked into the future together, both of us ready to leave the weight of betrayal and heartbreak behind. This wasn't just a rebound or a way to fill the void. This was something real, built on mutual respect, shared pain, and a promise to never make the same mistakes our exes had made. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was genuinely looking forward to what was next.